Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. Today is going to be a theoretical tutorial about DOM manipulation in Wix, and this is great both for those web devs of you who are kind of new to Wix and want to learn how to implement your web development skills in Wix, and those of you who are coming from a Wix background and want to try and understand some web development concepts in a more in-depth way. And we're going to be talking about two methods for manipulating the DOM, both using Velo code and using custom code from the dashboard. And just heads up, if you enjoy this kind of tutorial, then you might want to take a look at my new Velo for Beginners course, which is available on Udemy, which talks about web development subjects like DOM manipulation and shows the relationship between them and Wix and JavaScript. So if you want to learn all about that, you can head over to Udemy and I'll put the link in the description below. And if you're just here for this tutorial, then let's get started. Okay, so as you can see, we're starting off at a slightly different point than we usually would for one of these Wix Velo tutorials. And what I have open here is VS Code. It's a very popular IDE or code editor for writing pretty much any kind of code. And the reason I have it open here with this boilerplate HTML is because I want to give a little context to the tutorial and explain DOM manipulation in a general sense in web development before hopping in and showing how it is done on Wix. So if you're already familiar with these concepts, you're a web developer and you're just kind of trying to understand the Wix environment, you may want to skip these next minute or two. But if you are one of our classic watchers of the channel and you're coming from Wix and Velo, then you might want to watch this because it'll really help you understand this general concept first. So before we talk about DOM manipulation and how that's done, let's talk a little bit about what is the DOM. So as you can see here in the MDN documentation, DOM stands for Document Object Model, and it is the data represent. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to read that whole thing, but if you do want to, you can. I'll leave the link below and you can come back to that later. But I will show you what the DOM is. So if you go over here to an example web page, and you could do this with any website that you open up, this specifically is a page representing the HTML that I just showed you before. It's not online, it's just following the direct path from my browser. And if you right click and click inspect, I know you can't see when I right click, but trust me, if you're in Chrome and you right click, you'll see the option to go ahead and inspect, and then it will open up this kind of side tab over here, and you'll want to go into the elements section. I know we usually use this console section, but you'll want to go here to this elements section. And here, essentially what you see is a representation of the DOM, which is essentially the HTML of your website in its final form. And it's a hierarchy, okay, just like HTML is. So you have the body as kind of the, highest point in the hierarchy, and then underneath each thing you have additional parts of the HTML. So here if I open up body, then you can see under it we have the H1, and each one of these things is an object in the object model. Okay, that's basically what the DOM is. And manipulating the DOM is when we change a certain part of the HTML, essentially not through our HTML, but by using JavaScript. So we make changes to HTML using JavaScript. In one line, that's basically what manipulating the DOM is. So let's demonstrate how we would do that from a regular web development perspective. So let me go back to our VS Code. Just going to open that right over here. And first, let's talk about how we would add something into our HTML just without DOM manipulation. So just adding something into our HTML, because I want to contrast that later on with how we add stuff to HTML or to our DOM using Wix. So here you can see that I have the body, and let's say I want to add something to my HTML. So all I need to do is really just add a tag. So let's say I add a div, and I'm going to give it an ID just to make the DOM manipulation part a little easier later on. And I'm just going to call it the div. Okay, so that's going to be here my element. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add here a paragraph, and I'm going to write the div. And what I'm also going to do is add some inline styling just so that you can see kind of the div more clearly. So let's add a style tag. And here I'm going to say that background color should be red. And we're also going to give it some height and width. So let's give it height 400 pixels and width 400 pixels. Okay, just so you can see that over there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this page. And then if I go back to the web page that I had open before, and I just give it a little bit of a refresh, then you can see here the div that I added in using HTML. And if we go here into the DOM, okay, the DOM representation here, you can see my new div has been added. And you'll notice that essentially it looks almost exactly like it did inside of my original HTML. And just remember this point, because when we hop over to Wix, we're going to contrast this and we're going to see how something looks after I add it to my Wix canvas. And that immense difference is going to also highlight the difference between DOM manipulation on a regular, quote unquote, regular website and on a Wix website. Okay, so just remember this point. And in terms of DOM manipulation, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the background here to be blue. Okay, and we're going to be doing this using JavaScript. So I'm going to head back over to my code in VS Code, and we're going to add in a script here on the bottom. So right over here towards the bottom of the body, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add here script. And often scripts are written as kind of separate files of code, but they can also be added just like this. And what I'm going to do is first select this HTML element. Okay, so I'm going to select this div, just this div right over here. And I'm going to say const the div equals to, and then we're going to say document. Okay, so remember document, object model, DOM, document. Okay, just notice these kind of corresponding terminologies. And then get element by ID. And I'm going to give it the ID that we have over here for this div. So that's the div. And this should retrieve this element from the DOM. Okay, from our HTML. And now we can essentially use JavaScript to manipulate it and change it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the div dot style dot background color equals blue. Okay, not blur, blue. And let's just format this, and I'm going to save it. And if we head back to our actual site now, and I give it a refresh, then you can see that we've changed the background to blue. Okay, so that is a super, super simple version of DOM manipulation. And if I go over here to the body, and I take a look here at the representation of the DOM now, you can see here that it says that background color is blue. So this is not the original HTML per se, but it is a representation of the DOM as I'm viewing it at the moment after my web page has fully loaded and after all the DOM manipulations have occurred. And sometimes if you're loading a web page and it takes a really long time to load, because JavaScript is changing things as the web page is loading, if you have this Elements tab open, you can actually see the changes in the DOM happening live if your internet is slow enough, and you'll see different things flashing around here and it changing before your very eyes. So this is, again, this is a representation of the DOM and not necessarily the original HTML which you wrote in your code. So that wraps up our background, and now we're going to head over to Wix and talk about how DOM manipulation happens over there and how the DOM looks when we're creating a Wix website. Okay, so here I am on a brand new Wix website in the classic editor. And what I'm going to show you now is true for all the editors, even though they work kind of differently in terms of, responsive design and some other elements. The way that they treat the DOM and how DOM manipulation happens is exactly the same for all the different kinds of Wix editors. So whether you're using the classic or editor X, everything that I'm saying now should hold true. And first thing I want to do is just contrast what the DOM looks like in a regular Wix website and what it looked like in the kind of very classic site that we were creating earlier. So in order to do that, I'm just going to go over here and click Add Elements and add a box, which would be the closest thing to that div that we added before to our website. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this design so that it has a red background. And I'm going to go ahead and put a little text inside. So I'm going to select just a regular paragraph. And I'm going to say this is a paragraph. And put that inside of the box. Okay, so this is the Wix version of what we did using HTML previously. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and publish this website and go to view the live site. And here you can see kind of our red box. And if I right click and click inspect and take a look at the elements here, you'll notice quite a big difference between my Wix website and the other site that we had before, even though theoretically there shouldn't be much of a difference because we just have kind of a blank website with a red box with text inside. So you might think that this would look very similar in terms of the DOM structure to what we had before. But as you can see here, essentially whenever we put something on top of our Wix canvas, Wix is taking that and interpreting it into HTML in its own kind of construed way, with lots of different rules and subsections and things in order to make sure that your website looks in a certain way when it's opened in different browsers, even though all you did was kind of drag a red box and put it on your canvas. And if you could see here, so I'm going to right click here and click inspect. Okay, so here we can see this is essentially the div that represents the kind of red box that we added. And not only this represents it, but also this represents it. And inside we have more things that represent it. And you can see that it's still highlighted here. So all of these are essentially different parts of this very simple red box that I added in here. And if we go deeper down, then we have the another div inside, which has the paragraph inside it. Okay, so essentially this simple red box has let's see how many. One, two, three, four or five divs. Okay, even though it looks very similar to what we had before. The text, luckily, is just text. Okay, so that's rather simple. And every time we add something to our Wix website, essentially we're adding all of this additional information to the DOM. So we're going to need to keep this in mind when we're going for DOM manipulation, and we talk about the different approaches that we have to that in Wix. Okay, so now that we have ample background in both general web development and Wix when it comes to DOM and DOM manipulation, let's talk about the two ways that we can essentially manipulate the DOM in Wix. So the first approach is one that you're probably familiar with, and that is using Velo code. And the way to use Velo code on your Wix website is by going here to Dev Mode and turning on Dev Mode. If you're using either Editor X or Studio, it might be in a slightly different location, but essentially you're going to want to turn on Dev Mode or Coding Mode, one of the two, and that will give you access to a Velo editor. And when it comes to DOM manipulation using Velo, essentially we are limited to a very specific set of APIs that Wix allows us to use. So we don't have full control over the DOM like we would with a regular website that I showed you just now in VS Code, but we have to look at the Wix documentation and see what Wix essentially allows us to do. And the reasoning behind this limitation in the manipulation of the DOM, I'm assuming, again, I haven't seen official documentation about this, is a combination between security and convenience for the user, and maybe a little bit of just a design choice that Wix made a long time ago and they can't really back out of right now. So essentially, once you give somebody control over the DOM and allow them to do whatever they want, it makes it much easier for them to potentially break something and maybe even create either intentionally or unintentionally some kind of security vulnerability. So that's one reason that you might want to prevent somebody from manipulating the DOM. As we saw in Wix, the DOM can get very, very complex. So you can imagine the intricacies that would be needed to make a change there. And we are going to see that in the second method for manipulating the DOM. But when it comes to Velo code, essentially we are limited to kind of the recipes that Wix gives us. So in a very basic sense, the way that we select an element, so what was previously get element by ID, is by using the IDs that Wix has built in. And these IDs are not directly inside of the HTML. This is something within the Wix system that we tap into in order to manipulate the DOM. So here the ID is box1, and I can easily just change this to correspond to the ID that I had in my other example, let's say the div. And then in order to select this, I would go over here inside of my onReady function, and I would use $W and select the div. And if you don't see it automatically detecting with the IntelliSense, then you can just click somewhere in the canvas and go back, and now you can see that my error is gone. And once we've selected the element, now we can do some very specific manipulations that Wix allows us to do. So for example, here, if I click dot, then you can see the different parts, properties, and methods of the element that I can tap into. And different elements will have different things. So I can collapse this element, which will essentially remove it from the DOM, and I can hide it. And some of the elements also have style. Okay, and this will allow us to make very small changes to style. I think there's like 5 or 6 preset things that we can change. So here, if I click dot, then you'll see, yeah, I can change here background color, border width, color, etc. And I'm going to just change background color just so it corresponds to what we did earlier. And I'm going to set it to equal blue. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and publish that. And if I go and view the live site, so let me go ahead and refresh. And now you can see that my div is blue. Okay, so that is an example of DOM manipulation using Velo code. Obviously, you can do much more complex DOM manipulations using data and setting values and stuff like that. But in the end of the day, you are limited to Wix's pre-made set of APIs and rules and techniques for interacting with the DOM. And that is good for a lot of cases, but there are also some cases where that just doesn't cut it. And you need to do something more complex that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do using just Velo code. And just for example, this could be if you want to change one of the built-in Wix apps, for example, that come out of the box and you can't interact with Velo code at all, or just other nuanced changes that Velo code doesn't allow you to make. And that is where you're going to use something called custom code. So that leads me to the second way that we can manipulate the DOM in Wix, and that is custom code. And custom code is actually not done through the editor, but rather through the dashboard. And it happens to be in a slightly unintuitive place. So it's not here inside of developer tools, but rather it's inside of settings. And then all the way on the bottom, you can go over here to custom code. And as you can see here, unlike Velo code, which can be added to any website, no matter if it's premium or upgraded or has a domain, When you want to add custom code, you specifically can only do that with a website that is both a premium website and has its own unique domain. And this kind of connects to the idea of the security when it comes to the DOM manipulation. And I'm pretty sure that's because if you were to gain control over the DOM on your regular kind of editor URL, then essentially you might have the ability to influence other websites as well because you're all working on the same domain. And this is just a theory that I have. I'm not 100% sure. But either way, whatever the reason is, you cannot add custom code without upgrading your site and connecting a domain, which makes it also a little bit harder to work with and practice and just test your theories with. But that's just how it is at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hop over to the Wix Wiz site right over here, which is a site that is both premium and has a domain. And I'm going to demonstrate custom code over here. So essentially what I'm going to try and do with custom code is change something here on the consultations page. And this is essentially a Wix app. So this is the Wix bookings app. And here is where you can book a consultation with me if you want to discuss any kind of, Wix or Velo related topics. And what I want to change here is I want to get rid of this available online kind of widget here for the quick consultation. And I know that technically this is something that can be done through the settings. So I don't really need to do this DOM manipulation. I'm just doing it for demonstration purposes on a Wix app because often the Wix apps will have things that you cannot control using either Velo code or through the settings. And this is not one of those cases, but I'm going to pretend that it is one of those cases. And let's just go over here. The first step will be to right click and go and inspect the page and identify the element that we want to manipulate inside of our DOM. So I'm just going to right click on the element itself and click inspect. And I know that you can't see when I'm actually clicking inspect, but believe me that I am. And if you go and play around yourself, you'll understand pretty quickly what I'm doing. And you can see here, as I move throughout the DOM, then it highlights the actual part of the DOM that I'm looking at the moment. So here, if I highlight this, then you can see it's kind of most of that available online widget. And if I go up one more, okay, so this is already the quick consultation. And here, this is essentially the widget. Okay, so this, my hunch is at the moment, and whenever you're dealing with the custom code, there's going to be some element of trial and error. So I think that this is the element that I want to be manipulating in the DOM. And essentially what I'm going to have to do is select this div and just remove it from the DOM. And the way I'm going to do that is because there's no ID here, I'm going to try and do it using one of these classes here. So let's take a look. Yeah, so I see that there's a class here. Let's see. Okay, so let's try selecting it using this class over here. And this is a little dangerous because I don't know if this class possibly belongs to something else on the page as well, and it might affect some other parts of my web page, but usually the Wix elements will have some kind of ID that you can use, and that's always the safest because IDs are only specific to one element in the DOM, whereas classes can be applied to many elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this class inside of the custom code, and I'm going to select the element that matches this class using a query selector. Okay, so here back in the custom code panel, I am going to add in a new kind of snippet of custom code. And before I do that, just you'll notice that there are three options essentially for adding in the custom code, and that is the head, the body start, and the body end. And this is essentially where Wix is going to inject that code snippet that you write, which has to be written as HTML, into the general HTML of the page. And depending on the code that you're writing, it will need to go in different places on the page. Specifically, code that's related to DOM manipulation will usually be in the body end, and that's because we want to make sure that the entire web page has loaded before we start trying to manipulate it. Otherwise, when we're trying to select different IDs and classes, then they might not yet exist on the page if we run the code in the head or body start. Okay, so I'm going to add in some code here to the body end, and this is called custom. I'm just going to call it DOM manipulation demo. So I remember to turn it off after, and you don't try and go to my site and everything's ruined. And here is essentially where we're going to write our code. If you're writing slightly complex code, you might want to write this in an editor like VS Code and then paste it over here, because this little sliver of code writing area is really annoying to work with if you have to write a lot of code. But since I'm really only writing like 1 or 2 lines, then I'm going to do it over here. So first we're going to need to open up some script tags, and that's because we're adding in JavaScript through HTML. Okay, so we're going to add in an opening and closing script tag, and you'll see that there's no like auto completion, there's no anything. So it's really very error prone if you write the code directly over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the element in the DOM that we're trying to manipulate. So I'm going to say const, what was it? Um, Availability. Did I spell that wrong? Yeah. Availability widget equals 2, and it's going to be document dot query selector, and we're going to use that class that we had over there. So I'm going to open up open up quotation marks, and then dot, and then it's going to be, I'm going to start with this first class that we have over here and see if this one works. So let me just copy that, and I'm going to paste it right over here inside of my code, and I'm going to close parentheses, and that should give me back this element, hopefully. And what I'll do is I'll add in here a console log, console.log availability widget, just to see what I selected and make sure that I actually managed to select something and we don't have any errors. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove that from the DOM. So I'm going to say availability. Better to copy and paste here because there's no auto completion and it's really easy to make a mistake. Dot remove. And that should remove it from the DOM. So now you also have the option if you want to load this on all pages. And I don't need to load this on all pages because this is really only relevant to one specific page of my site. And that is, oh, sorry. So I'm going to go here and choose specific pages. And I'm going to go to the consultations page, okay? Because I only really need to load this code in the specific page. You also have the option to, oh, whoops. There we go. And you also have the option to switch between where the code is placed inside of this code, custom code widget editor, whatever you want to call it. So if I click here and click and switch to body start, then you'll see the code snippet kind of move around here between the different parts. So that's just how you would change it if you decide to change the location on the page. Awesome. So let me go ahead and click OK. And you can see here that the code has been added in and that it is enabled. Okay, and the cool thing about custom code is that you can actually enable it and disable it without publishing your website again. So if I click disable, then it won't work for anybody who loads my site right now. And if I click enable, then it should work for anybody who reloads the site, even though I haven't published my site in between toggling this. So let me go ahead to the consultations page, and I'm going to go ahead and refresh. And this is a moment of truth, and voila. So you can see here, oh, no. Oh, I got so excited. It didn't work. But what we did see actually is, I don't know if you saw it here as the page was loading. So what I talked about earlier, that you kind of see the flashes as the DOM is changing as the page loads, and that you might have been able to see here as it was loading if you were paying attention. But as you can see, the available online widget is still here. So that's a bit of a fail. And let's try and figure out why that is. So if I go here to, okay, so if I go here to the console, then you can see that I did manage to select the element correctly. So here we can see it's just logging one very specific element of the DOM. And you can see here that I've selected the element that I was trying to select. So that part went smoothly. What didn't work is the dot remove. Okay, so maybe I was using the wrong method in JavaScript. So let me just go ahead and double check that and see if that might have been our issue. Okay, so I am back, and I think I found the problem, and I definitely found a solution. So what I thought the problem is that even though using dot remove technically is correct, because of the kind of asynchronous manner in which Wix pages load, they're very complex. Essentially what was happening is that the remove method was working, but then at some point Wix was kind of adding the element back in at some point in some way that I'm not really sure how. But the workaround is that instead of using the remove method, what we can do is instead set the display of the element to none. And this still takes hold because essentially we're making a stylistic change. So even if Wix adds the element back in at some point later on, then it still adds it in with that stylistic change and it's not displaying. So as you can see here now, the widget is not displaying here under quick consultation, and that is what we were trying to achieve. And let me just show you the changes that I made here in the code. So if I go here to edit settings, so you'll see we're still selecting the element in the same way, but just here, instead of using dot remove, essentially I am doing dot style dot display equals none. And this basically means don't display this element on the page, but it's still technically part of the DOM. Okay, so the element is still technically there. It's just a stylistic change that makes it non-visible. Okay, so that's a demonstration of how you would use custom code in order to do DOM manipulation. As you saw, even though this is something that I've done numerous times, I still sometimes can struggle and need to do a lot of testing and trial and error when I'm doing DOM manipulation with this method, just because of the intricacies of how Wix loads its site and the Wix DOM is built, and kind of the challenges of editing within this very small kind of editor over here. So all of that put together makes this a little bit of a challenge, but it does allow you to do things that you otherwise might not be able to do using Velo code as a DOM manipulation method. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this tutorial. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, don't forget, first of all, to like this video and subscribe to the channel for new videos like this every week. You're also welcome to check out my new course on Udemy, where we cover topics like this and other Wix-related topics in depth. And I'll see you next time.